Welcome to Digital Value Creation. It's great to have you guys. For those of you new to us, this is a channel between me and my brother. He works in AI hardware and I work for an AI software company. Good to have you today. So what we thought we'd talk about is the AI fatigue. It's an ongoing conversation inside companies, when I talk to customers, or when my brother is talking to vendors. And it all happened in the last probably 6 months, when all the expectations and all the promises of AI at many companies became a question mark. Are we getting the value? Are we getting the productivity increase? And it made me think, like, I stepped back and I said, on one hand, you see the military launching AI-driven drones. Not that I'm advocating for it, but they trust the system, they trust AI to perform such a complex task. And on the other hand, there are companies that are struggling to trust AI to pay their bills. So I think there is definitely a gap between what's possible and what's already being deployed and what the mainstream companies or ourselves are adopting. So what we thought about is, let's talk about this AI fatigue, and let's go back to where we are in generative AI specifically. So we are in the middle of a gold rush, which we'll look at from various lenses later today. But there are 6,000 AI companies by my count. There are over $40 billion have been invested in AI startups. It's a staggering amount. And companies, the average company is experimenting with dozens of these new technologies. And some are getting far with them, some are just keep experimenting and never graduate. But think about this from a buyer perspective. If you see 6,000 companies out there and you say, I'm going to look at 1% of them, you still have to talk to 60 companies, listen to what they have to say, how they're approaching this topic, and none of us have the answers. It's a massive complexity of this. And these companies, especially the large one, the large big tech, like OpenAI, are investing billions of dollars in creating this capability. And it's estimated that OpenAI is already losing $5 billion a year. And there are massive investments in the big tech to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars across, and they have to find a way to monetize it. So it's predictable that thousands of these companies will not survive, at least the startups, and thousands of projects will not mature. So how do we get ahead of this? And how do we become part of the winners, whether we're companies, whether we're individuals, or whether we're vendors? And that's sort of what we'd like to tackle today. And one of the biggest ways I thought about it is exactly what I mentioned, is when you're a buyer and you're trying to make sense out of this technology, what do you do? How do you even approach this topic? And I have the perfect person who does this every day, my brother, who evaluates these technologies. How do you even tackle this? How do you not get overwhelmed?
Brilliant question, Thomas. Actually, I love that Gartner just released their latest update on their AI hype cycle and predicting this slowdown, and partially not just because of technology readiness or open questions about technology, but about how messy and unconcentrated that space is and how that can actually slow down the buying cycle. I mean, as a buyer, we are evaluating existing enterprise solutions because they are the safe bet, except many of them are just AI painting their tool set. And if you want to have breakthrough innovation, you want to lean towards startups, but which one? And e-startups have these days amazing credentials. Stanford CFO, DeepMind CEO, the top innovator CTOs. So how do you place a bet about who will really make it? Where do you co-invest? I think that will be a critical item about how to maintain space, how to maintain focus. It's a big internal topic also for most companies, that what do you build yourself? What do you leverage open source components that might be safe because they can be continued to maintain and they are developing super fast? Where you want to lean into big tech because they invest and they have the ability to eventually get it right. And really the only solution on the table is, for me, pick a use case that creates real value and pick a vendor that can help you make progress.
One aspect of AI fatigue that we talked about is what happens with all that money that you invest in hardware and cloud infrastructure. And I thought about this quite a bit recently because there was an article maybe a week ago that talked about the $100 billion plus that have been invested in AI compute by the large tech vendors. And in order to recover that money, they would have to sell $600 billion worth of services, software, something to customers. So there has to be a market all of a sudden that doesn't exist yet that's going to consume all this capability. And many companies are doing this. You may be one of them. You launched out your co-pilots. You may have set up your own AWS infrastructure to run your own inference engine and the like. But tech vendors are investing at a much larger scale. And where is this investment going? Who's getting all this money? So ultimately, there's a term in finance called economic rent. So there's ultimately a winner. Right now, that winner is NVIDIA. But ultimately, it's going to be the chip makers, where all this money ultimately flows because you pay your cloud vendor. The cloud vendor eventually has to acquire hardware, and the ultimate hardware to acquire is obviously the AI chip. So all this money flows to NVIDIA. But there are others entering. Grok launched a new chip. Sam Altman is talking about creating Brain AI to create another chip manufacturer. Qualcomm's into chips. AWS and Facebook, Meta, it will all be into chips. So there's going to be this wave of additional investment beyond that hundreds of billions we've seen, and this has to be monetized. Somebody somewhere has to pay for this.
This is even accelerating. I mean, if I look at the latest report from Microsoft, just in the last quarter, they invested almost $20 billion in hardware expansion. And this is about data centers, this is about consuming more power, but ultimately, as you said, is the chip maker and the hardware manufacturers for now. If I'm looking at just the Llama 3.1 model released, that's estimated over $100 million just to train that model. And the Meta is already talking about the next model to be trained is an order of magnitude higher. So the question is, how to justify that investment? Because there's no simple ROI. It's almost like the fear of missing out. And many CEOs talk about that they cannot afford not to be in a game, regardless of the price tag. And I think it's worthwhile to take a step back about what are the promises of all this AI investment can lead to. And I mean, I know you are passionate about some of the articles from MIT, BCG, about what they predicted.
We went back to old articles, and we're going to put them all in the notes. So if we looked at like MIT, BCG, EY, PwC, others, there were predictable things that are going to happen. One is economic growth, which is ultimately driven by business growth. So they expected this massive revenue growth at companies. Productivity increase. So there's a general decline of human productivity. So if we could just make everybody more productive, the output would increase and companies would produce more, societies would be better. So these were quantified in the trillions. And if they were realized, then all of a sudden, all of these investment would make sense. Unfortunately, in the day-to-day projects, we forget that, and we're experimenting with smaller things, and it's really hard to think about big things when you're part of a department somewhere. But ultimately, these two things have to be connected. And what we learned from it, and again, I'll put these details in the show notes, is long-term, the potential by all smart minds is enormous. Short-term, it feels like out of all the meeting summaries and PowerPoints we all generated and maybe automated some small processes, it wasn't generating the massive return. We still work, 8 to 5 or 8 to 8 days, right? So that is, I think, the beginning of the fatigue. Both companies look at this saying, hey, are we getting tangible value? But you and I look at it and we're saying, is this adding up to something meaningful? And it's eventually going to come back to scaling. How do we scale this at a level where you and I can work less, the companies could be more efficient and produce more with less? And that's going to be the question.
And talking about scaling, it seems that on a short term, one company, or the type of companies who can make money are the hyperscalers. I think a key NVIDIA pitch is that every dollar they spend on GPU expansion, they should be able to rent it out to $3 to $5. I mean, yet to be seen, but there's definitely a need for that. But ultimately, that scaling only makes sense if there's an end market and if there is companies like ours who can consume it. And I really like the recent Deloitte study because it talk about what is the biggest limitation of scaling is actually education. And so many times in companies, we are challenged that what's the point of all this experimentation? When will they actually turn into something tangible that moves the needle? But one of the side benefit of the experimentation or Copilot rollout is learning. And according to Deloitte, companies who invested time to uplevel their employee population did not just achieve productivity benefit. What they find that use cases started to emerge beyond the obvious one, beyond like IT, legal, customer service. Because all of a sudden, people start to think about problems they could not solve with traditional systems. Now they might be solvable, at least partially. And there is a significant delta between organizations who reached a level of general AI literacy to those who did not. And they tend to overperform solving real problems in different domains by 30 to 40%. So for me, it seems that education is a worth investment, but ultimately needs to lead to something. And probably in the study, that's one important part that currently the missed opportunity that most AI effort focuses on efficiency. Now, efficiency is good, but innovation and growth is where the change really happens.
So aren't you all glad you came here? Because you're going to get the answer how to overcome AI fatigue. For some of you know this. So we posted, Arpad and I posted this model a couple of months ago, like the predictable journey, going from entertainment to education to efficiency and effectiveness. And predictably, we always talk about this. You have to move beyond experimentation, which is education and entertainment, in order to get beyond that. And I wanted to get to value creation. I want to get to that effectiveness. But everybody has to go through this process. So while we're being impatient about it, I actually finally am convinced this is a real winner, right? Like, if you think about it, there are millions, probably billions of people that had direct exposure to the technology. They think in the terms of prompt engineering. Like, everybody's a prompt engineer now. They think about like how they can combine data with prompting. Like, they don't think this is a rag, but in some ways they're thinking about preparing data that's better consumable by AI, even outside businesses. So this is a big deal. And so that's the clear winner. So we should celebrate this, even if we're fatigued, like we're not at the promised land yet. So I think that's good. And I think generally AI literacy, I think there's a whole language. There's probably going to be a dictionary published with all the new AI words that everybody in the world speaks. So that's real, right? But there's also fatigue. And let's be real about it. So one fatigue is probably, my brother talked about this for them at a company evaluating all these technologies, but probably for you and me, like, oh, if there is another AI podcast like this one, I'm going to kill myself. But that's part of it. We're all learning. We're all making sense out of it. Everybody you listen to is going to have an opinion on this. And all these changes are disrupting. And whatever I thought was going to happen this week is different. Somebody always coming with new technologies. It's tiring. And there's also an information overload because of all of this. Because it's a cool topic. Everybody wants to talk about it. It just adds to the confusion and the complexity. But the real problem with fatigue, I think, is the expectation. So there was a lot of promises. I made them, you made them, and we can't deliver on some of those promises, right? So these misaligned expectations eventually are also learning experience, saying this is what we can realistically accomplish in a year.
So in addition to focus on value creation, for me, what's critical is how you measure it, how you measure progress. Because in traditional systems, we have clear ideas. I've seen hundreds of AI initiatives, personally reviewed dozens of use cases in each domain I'm supporting. And a lot of times the measurement is very vague. And we actually implemented some of clear metrics, even with some of our contracting with smaller startups. where they need to hit certain performance criteria for the solution to be viable. And I think many times we don't step back and say, what is good enough? I mean, most of these systems are outperforming humans, but we still sometimes expect perfection. This is not a deterministic system. It will not be perfect. But when it's good enough, when is the error or hallucination that introduced is destructive and destroys value, when it is maybe just part of the game and it's already outperforming. So that's very important. And for me, the more important is there's an expectation gap that this system demos so well. You can get very quickly to a potential glimpse of what's possible, that you expect that can be put in production. And this is more than ever a very iterative development, continuously refinement, both because the technology is developing at crazy speed and you have newer models available, newer techniques, newer tuning opportunities, but also because these models need to be integrated in a broader process. And learning how they work, where you need to compensate, is going to be a journey. So what do you think companies need to do to navigate the hype cycle?
You and I talked about this all the time. It's sort of what you're talking about is you and I can't avoid it, so we're not going to give good advice. But I was thinking about like when I was on the wait list for Sora, still on the wait list for Sora, and I'm getting really aggravated. Why am I not clear of the wait list? And then you realize, what problem? What specific problem do I have for which Sora is going to be the solution and without which I cannot proceed? And I think that's ultimately the hype cycle problem, right? So we're getting all these news about interesting technologies, and we don't have a list of problems we actually want to solve. We're just looking for these new cool things to try out. And that's ultimately, I think, you went to the performance metrics. I think companies should take a breather. We should take a breather and say, these are my 17 problems I want to solve. And I can't solve with what I have today. So if something pops up on the screen, I should have this filter on saying, is this solving one of my 17 problems? And this is really hard. It's hard for me. If it doesn't solve, doesn't look like it's going to solve it, I move on. Because we have limited mental capacity to absorb all this news coming from 6,000 companies and thousands of thousands more academics, right? So that was my suggestion. Instead of us walking around with this AI hammer and looking for problems to solve, let's just have a list of problems we want to solve and let's filter through that everything, all the hype, all the news, and that's my hypothesis. That's why I think it's going to help.
Yes, and as you said, we should not go out with a hammer looking for a nail. And today there's a use case centric approach, which I'm a big believer of. You have to pick a use case. Don't pick a use case because it could be an AI use case and you want to deploy AI and you are looking for a reason. Pick a use case because certain processes don't work and you have a significant value destruction, value leakage in a company, and traditional solutions fall short or they are incomplete and you are compensating with a lot of extra work. So for me, AI is very rarely a solution, at least not at the current level of technology. It's a part of the solution. So the question is, what part of your end-to-end process are not working as smoothly as it could? And where traditional solutions are either too expensive, too complex, too slow to implement, and where AI can be a complement. So for me, the key takeaway is look at the end-to-end process and see the components, because ultimately for most real business problem, you need both some generative capabilities, if it can add value, but then you need integration with existing systems and data. You need some sort of agency, which doesn't need to be an AI agent. Maybe it's an RPA engine, maybe it's an integration script. But ultimately, you need to do something to create lasting enterprise value.
So this is maybe a closing thought for us today, but there are going to be some situations where generative AI will create a capability that you just couldn't even dream of, or it's going to change your competitive position in the market, or it's going to change your career opportunities because you couldn't do things before. So this could be loosely, we could call it a business model change, something breakthrough. And I'd argue that's far and few in between. So maybe in a company, I would suggest keep a team that does think about these blue ocean or crazy ideas and how we can transform the business now that that technology is available, and keep the rest of the company, and I know it's hard discipline, focusing on improving the processes. And I think same with us. Maybe set aside, I should tell myself, set aside just a little time to think about how this technology can completely transform how I or you do things. But 80% of the time, we should think about how this technology can make our current job, project, activities better. I think it's part of the discipline. Business model change is amazing. I think we all get caught up saying, hey, that's what we're doing. And I think 90% of the time, that's not what puts food on the table or helps businesses succeed. So business model change should have a category, should have time allocated. Maybe it's the Google 20% for all of us. The main job is process efficiency, improving effectiveness in every day, and making bigger bets.
We would love to hear from you, your use cases, not the one that you are looking to deploy desperately AI with, but issues that you think are hard to solve, and maybe this emerging technology can make a difference.
All right, and with that, thanks for listening, and see you next time.
See you soon.